Welcome to the Stoa, everyone, a place where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the nice edge of this very moment. I'm Peter Lindbergh, steward of the Stoa.
Sorry, I was sitting in the dark. I didn't want to seem too creepy when I turned everything on. So my question, I'll just read it. The body is kind of universal and can transcend everything and be a frame big enough for kind of all of us on the planet. So do you have any insights or anecdotes into how like your philosophy can create a common ground or like surprising relationships? And surprising could be like negative or anything. It doesn't mean good necessarily.
Yeah. The first thing that occurs to me is actually that, like, I would describe myself as a pretty hyper-masculine individual without a lot of connection to the feminine necessarily, and I can find female minds to be pretty and through teaching and sharing these things, I've had lots of really wonderful opportunities to be able to see the world from a woman's perspective and to draw value from that and to grow from it. So I feel like it's easier for me to teach, kind of the easiest population for me to teach is like 15 to 22-year-old hyper athletic males, right? They just kind of see the same way that I do. We'll be loud and abrasive and push each other around a lot and domineering, and it's great. But I learn a lot more when I work with female students, and I really enjoy that. So I'll tell you guys a little story about that. When I first started teaching parkour, we were doing a lot of really intense conditioning as part of our training. So for instance, we'd say, okay, we're only going to do 10 push-ups, but every push-up would take like 60 seconds and we'd be in like 30 different positions. And then almost everyone would fail by the time that we got through these 10 push-ups. And then we'd do the same thing for squats, and then we'd go for a run. Pretty much every female student that I'd had in the class had cried. One or another, and a number of years. So I was pretty alarmed by this. And I would kind of become obviously alarmed by it apparently during class and would sort of give too much attention to the person who was crying, which generally only made it worse. And so I had one of our apprentices, who was a woman, come to me and say, like, you may not have cried in several years, but these women you're responding to probably cry pretty regularly, so you just need to relax and not make such a big deal out of it. And so I did, and sure enough, like, they pretty much just stopped crying in most of my classes, and the problem resolved itself. Now, a few years later, I was at Return to the Source, our big event, and one of our students was up ahead of me on the creek. We were running down Wacom Creek, and she had come up to a jump between two boulders over a waterfall. And one of the other students, who is also a coach, was telling her that she could do it. Right? You can do this. Like, absolutely, you can do this. He's encouraging her to get ready for this jump. And I saw that she was physically capable of doing the jump. But I ran up and I didn't want her to feel too pressured, right? I didn't want her to feel like she had to do the jump in order to be accepted as part of the group. So I said, like, I know that you can do this jump, and I'm here to support you if you want to do this jump, but you don't have to do the jump. It's your choice. And she asked me, is it okay if I cry while I do the jump? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Jump, right? Like, whatever is your own process, your own way of doing it, you do that. And so she did the jump. And she was crying. And when she landed on the other side, she was still crying, and she was laughing, and she was crying. And we walked away and we talked about how that was good, and that was powerful, and it was wonderful, and it was great. And so that's become a big story about what we learned from these things. Now, the story continues because Maura now has come back to Return to the Source more often than any other student. She's been there for 5 years in a row. And she kind of cringes when I tell this story because she doesn't cry anymore. And she does pretty crazy things. Right? This year she jumped off a 30-foot cliff for the first time. Last year she did a backflip off of a rope swing for the first time. But without the education that Janine gave me, I wouldn't have been ready in the moment for Maura. And so that was a connection and awareness that has been really powerful. And I've also seen I've seen lots of beautiful moments like that. Year before last, or 2019, we had sometimes conversations around gender, sexuality, violence can come up around the rough and tumble play that we do. That can be a very revealing place for people, and people had that come up, and we had some folks in the group who were women who were traumatized and had a history of trauma and had adopted a very strong kind of anti-patriarchy belief system. But it turned out we also had men in the group who had been abused by ex-girlfriends and men who'd been raped by women. And that came out in the process of and it was really powerful because there were women in the group who didn't know beforehand that such a thing could happen to a man, or didn't have a felt sense that that was possible, and didn't really have any empathy for that idea in a man. But when they saw these very strong, very capable men talk about this experience, it changed things for them. And at the same time, for those men to be witnessed by women who they might have thought of as their ideological enemies in their vulnerability, and not to be attacked for it and not to be looked down on for it, was incredibly powerful and healing. So that's that's my best answer to that question.
Saruman believes that it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. I found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay. Simple acts of kindness and love. Why, Bilbo Baggins? Perhaps it is because I'm afraid. But it gives me courage.